somewhere off the coast of the Philippines, 3,000 feet down in the black silt of the South China Sea, there is a steel hull with 79 American sailors still inside her. Her name is USS Harder. 80 years ago, in 4 nights in June of 1944, her captain did something the United States Navy had told every submarine commander never to do. He turned his boat toward a charging Japanese destroyer, and he fired. Then he did it again, and again, and again. By the time he was finished, 5 Japanese warships were on the bottom of the Pacific. An entire Japanese fleet was in panicked retreat, and the largest naval air battle in history was about to begin, and Japan was going to lose it before she even knew why. This is the story of a quiet man from Dallas, Texas, who wanted to leave the Navy twice before the war began. Instead, the war made him a legend, and then it killed him. The Sibutu Passage is a narrow ribbon of black water between the Philippines and Borneo. On the night of June 6, 1944, the moon was full, the sea was flat, and a Japanese destroyer named Minazuki was closing on an American submarine at 20 knots. Her captain had orders that were simple and absolute. Find the submarine. Kill it. Do not return without confirmation. Behind Minazuki, 2 more destroyers spread out in a killing formation. Hayanami, Tanikaze, 3 hulls, 16 main guns, hundreds of depth charges. Almost 600 Japanese sailors, all trained for one purpose: to hunt the thing beneath the waves. The thing beneath the waves was USS Harder, and her captain was doing something no American submarine commander was supposed to do. He was not running. He was turning to face them, to understand why a man would point the nose of a fragile submarine directly at a destroyer bearing down at 20 knots. You have to go back. Not to the war, not even to the Navy. You have to go back to a boy in Dallas, Texas, in the early 1900s, whose father died before he was old enough to remember the sound of his voice. Samuel David Dealey was born on September 13, 1906. He was 37 years old on the night of June 6, 1944. He had a wife named Edwina. He had 3 children. He had a face that photographs would later describe as unremarkable, the face of a bank clerk or a school teacher, the kind of face you would pass on the street without noticing. He was not a hero out of a recruitment poster. He was thin. He was quiet. He wore reading glasses when he studied charts. And twice in his career, before the war made the decision for him, he had submitted paperwork to leave the United States Navy. Both requests were denied. Both requests were denied. The first time was in the 1930s. The Navy needed submariners, and Dealey had graduated the Naval Academy in 1930 in the middle of his class. Not brilliant, not memorable, just competent enough to be useful. The second time came later, when the pressure of long deployments and a growing family made him wonder if he was built for the life he had chosen. The Navy said no. The Navy always said no. And so, in December of 1942, when the brand new submarine USS Harder slid down the ways at Groton, Connecticut, it was Samuel Dealey who stood on her deck as her first and only captain. He had never wanted to be famous. He had never wanted to be a legend. He just wanted to do the job in front of him and then go home to Edwina and the children. The war would not allow it. Before Dealey, there was a rule in the American submarine force, an iron rule, a rule written in the blood of dead men. If a Japanese destroyer detects you, you run, you dive deep, you rig for silent running, you shut down every fan and every pump. You order the crew to stop moving, stop talking, sometimes even stop breathing loudly, and you pray, because the math was brutal. A Japanese destroyer could sprint at 35 knots on the surface. A submarine submerged could barely manage 9. A destroyer carried echo-ranging sonar that could find a submarine in the dark. It carried depth charges that could crush a pressure hull like an eggshell. It carried a crew of men who had been training for years to kill the exact kind of vessel you were sitting inside. Between December 1941 and March 1944, Japanese destroyers sank 14 American submarines, 14 crews, hundreds of men who never came home. American submarines sank Japanese destroyers too sometimes. Wahoo did it. Trigger did it. But almost always from ambush, from long range, from the shadows. Almost never from head-on, at knife-fighting range, with the destroyer already charging. To do that was to bet your life on a single spread of torpedoes. If they missed, the destroyer would be on top of you within a minute. And a minute was not enough time to escape. The rule was, you do not turn to face them, you run. Dealey read that rule. He understood that rule. And then, in the spring of 1944, he decided the rule was wrong. The first crack in the rule came from a place no ordinary sailor could see. It came from Pearl Harbor, from a windowless room where American cryptographers were breaking the Japanese naval code JN-25 and reading messages the Imperial Navy believed were secret. What they read in early 1944 changed everything. Japan was running out of destroyers. The battles around the Solomon Islands had eaten them alive. Tassafaronga, Vela Gulf, Empress Augusta Bay. Ship after ship, hull after hull, sunk in the black waters of the South Pacific. And Japan could not build them fast enough to replace them. Every destroyer Japan lost meant one less escort for a carrier task force, one less protector for a convoy of oil tankers crawling up from Borneo, one less hunter searching for submarines like Harder. Vice Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the Pacific Submarine Force, saw the intelligence and made a decision. He reversed the rule. From now on, he told his captains, destroyers were not to be avoided. Destroyers were to be hunted. But hunting a destroyer meant getting close enough to kill it before it killed you. And that meant a tactic almost no one had ever attempted at close range. A tactic so dangerous the Navy did not even have an official name for it. The captains called it the down-the-throat shot. You turned your bow toward the destroyer as she charged. You fired torpedoes straight into her path. And then, in the seconds before she rammed you or her sonar locked on for the killing blow, you crash-dived beneath her keel and hoped. Hoped the torpedoes hit. Hoped the destroyer did not have time to fire back. Hoped the depth charges she released as she passed overhead exploded above you and not around you. It was not courage, it was arithmetic. A destroyer charging bow-on had the smallest sonar profile she would ever present. A torpedo running straight at her had the shortest possible path to impact. If you fired at the right instant, at the right angle, at the right range, the geometry favored you. If you were wrong about any of it, you died. Dealey studied the numbers. He wrote to Lockwood. He asked for formal permission to use the tactic. Lockwood granted it. And with that permission, quietly, in a stateroom in Pearl Harbor, the man they would later call the destroyer killer was born. He did not look like a killer. He looked like a tired father who wanted to go home. But he had done the math. There was one more thing about Samuel Dealey that the legend, when it came, would leave out. He was not reckless. The story that would later be told in newsreels and in newspapers and in the words of admirals would paint him as a wild man, a gunfighter, a submarine captain who charged at anything that moved. That story was false. Read his patrol reports, all 6 of them, and a different man emerges. A man who broke off attacks when the geometry was bad. A man who slipped away from convoys when the escorts were too alert. A man who once trailed a Japanese task force for 2 full days before deciding the shot was not clean enough to justify the risk to his crew. Dealey did not fire torpedoes for glory. He fired them when the numbers said the torpedoes would hit. The crew knew this. That was why they followed him. Down in the enlisted mess of USS Harder, in the long nights between attacks, the men who ate powdered eggs and drank bitter coffee and listened to the endless creak of a pressure hull under strain, those men had a phrase for their captain. The old man does the math. It was not affection, exactly. It was something better than affection. It was trust. When Dealey said, "Turn," they turned. When Dealey said, "Fire," they fired. When Dealey said, "Take her deep," they took her deep. Because they had learned that if the old man had decided to fight, the old man had already run the numbers, and the numbers said they could win. On the night of June 6, 1944, in the moonlit water of the Sibutu Passage, the old man had run the numbers. The numbers said turn toward Minazuki. But before June, there was April. April 13th, 1944, east of Guam. The place where the theory of the down-the-throat shot became something else entirely. Where it became history. Harder had been patrolling for weeks. The crew was tired. The torpedo rooms smelled of sweat and diesel. And through the periscope, in the pale morning light, Dealey saw a Japanese destroyer named Ikazuchi turning toward him at high speed. Ikazuchi had spotted his periscope wake. She was charging. By every rule in the American submarine manual, Dealey should have gone deep. Instead, he called for a firing solution. Range, 900 yards. The men in the conning tower did not look at each other. They did not have to. They knew what 900 yards meant. It meant that if the torpedoes missed, Ikazuchi would be on top of them in under 90 seconds. It meant there was no room for a mistake, no second attempt, no correction. 4 torpedoes, spread pattern, fire. Then dive. The submarine tilted forward, her bow angling into the deep, and the crew braced against bulkheads and stanchions and each other. Somewhere above them, 4 steel fish were running toward a Japanese destroyer at 46 knots. Then the sound came, a deep, rolling thunder transmitted through the water felt in the chest before it was heard by the ears. Then another. 2 hits amidships. When Harder came back to periscope depth, Ikazuchi was gone. She had broken apart and sunk in 5 minutes, taking most of her crew with her to the bottom of the Pacific. Dealey composed his report. He had a dry sense of humor. He was famous for it in the officer corps, in the way that men who face death often become famous for small, quiet jokes. The radio message he sent back to Pearl Harbor became legendary in the Pacific Submarine Force. Expended 4 torpedoes and 1 destroyer. That was all. 9 words, no boasting, no commentary, just a bookkeeper's report from a man who had done the math and been proven right. At Pearl Harbor, Vice Admiral Lockwood read the message and, according to those present, laughed out loud. In Tokyo, when the loss of Ikazuchi was reported to the office of the Combined Fleet, no one laughed. Admiral Soamu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, was 58 years old, a man of iron discipline and few words. He had inherited a navy that was bleeding out. Between January and May of 1944, Japan had lost 23 destroyers to a war that seemed to consume them faster than the shipyards could replace them. And now this, a single American submarine in a single attack, taking Ikazuchi in the middle of the day. Toyota understood, before almost anyone else in the Japanese command, what this meant. The Americans had changed the rules. The stakes were about to rise higher than either side, yet understood, because Toyota was preparing an operation, a last desperate throw of the dice, an operation designated Ago. The plan was to lure the American Pacific Fleet to a decisive battle the Marianas Islands, and there, with land-based aircraft and the concentrated might of the mobile fleet, to destroy the American carriers once and for all. For the plan to work, Toyota needed his ships gathered in one place, quietly, invisibly, ready to strike. That place was Tawi-Tawi. Tawi-Tawi was a natural anchorage in the far southern Philippines, tucked between islands, close to the oil fields of Borneo. By late May of 1944, Toyota had assembled there the largest concentration of Japanese naval power since Midway. 4 battleships, including the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, 70,000 tons of armor and guns, 9 aircraft carriers, 15 cruisers, 28 destroyers. At the center of it all was Vice Admiral Giaisaburo Ozawa, 57 years old, one of the last of the great Japanese carrier admirals. A man who understood that his fleet was probably going to its death, and who was determined to make that death mean something. And in Pearl Harbor, the American cryptographers were reading his mail. They knew Tawi-Tawi. They knew Ozawa was there. They knew, roughly, what he intended. Vice Admiral Lockwood needed eyes near Tawi-Tawi. He needed a captain who could get in close, watch what came and went, and, if the opportunity arose, hurt them. He chose Harder. He chose Dealey. The orders came in late May of 1944. They were, on paper, straightforward. Depart Fremantle, Australia. Proceed to the waters off northeastern Borneo. Extract a team of 6 Australian commandos from the service's reconnaissance department, who had been operating in Japanese-held territory. Then proceed to the vicinity of Tawi-Tawi. Observe the enemy fleet. Report its movements and attack targets of opportunity. 2 missions in 1 patrol. 1 mission demanded absolute stealth. The Australian commandos were exhausted, hunted, running out of time. If Harder was detected during the extraction, they would die on the beach. The other mission required Harder to sit for days in some of the most heavily patrolled water in the Pacific within visual range of a Japanese fleet base ringed by destroyers, waiting for the enemy to come out. The 2 missions did not fit together. A stealthy submarine did not attack destroyers. A destroyer-hunting submarine did not sneak commandos off enemy beaches. Dealey read the orders and accepted them without comment. On May 26, 1944, USS Harder cast off her lines at Fremantle and slipped out into the Indian Ocean. She carried 24 torpedoes, 79 men, and a captain who had 2 children waiting at home and a job in front of him that could not be avoided. There was one more thing Dealey understood. As Harder ran north through the tropical night, one thing that would only become clear in the weeks ahead. The Japanese had begun using their destroyers differently. Instead of screening convoys and escorting carriers, some destroyers were now being sent out alone or in pairs on aggressive submarine hunts. Bait, in effect. Sacrificial pieces sent out to find the American submarines and force them to reveal themselves. Dealey saw the pattern in the intelligence briefings. He understood what it meant. The hunter was becoming the hunted. But the men doing the hunting in Japanese wardrooms from Tokyo to Tawi-Tawi did not yet understand something crucial. They believed they were sending destroyers to find submarines. They did not understand that they were also sending destroyers into the crosshairs of a captain who had already decided that destroyers were his mission. The bait in the waters off Tawi-Tawi was about to meet a captain who had been waiting his entire career for exactly this opportunity. On the night of June 6th, 1944, Minazuki was closing at 20 knots. Behind her, Hayanami and Tanikaze spread wide, searching. Their crews were confident. They were the hunters. They had the speed. They had the guns. They had the depth charges. They had the numbers. They did not know that the submarine they were hunting had already turned to face them. They did not know that her captain was studying them through his periscope, reading their course, watching their zigzag pattern, calculating the exact instant to fire. They did not know that in the conning tower of USS Harder, the old man was doing the math. And the math said they were about to die. The moon rose higher over the Sibutu Passage. The three destroyers pressed forward into the trap they did not know had been set. In the cramped, red-lit conning tower of USS Harder, Samuel Dealey lowered his eye from the periscope. He looked at his officers. He looked at the plot. He gave the order. And in the water ahead, unseen and unheard, the first torpedoes of the most consequential 4 days in the history of American submarine warfare began their run toward Minazuki's hull. The first torpedo left Harder's stern tube at 1 minute before 10 in the evening. Minazuki was 1,100 yards away. She was a Mutsuki-class destroyer, 1,500 tons of Japanese steel, launched in the year 1926, when most of the men aboard her were still children. She carried a crew of about 150. Farm boys from Kyushu, fishermen's sons from Hokkaido, a cook who had celebrated his 22nd birthday the week before. None of them saw the torpedoes coming. 2 of the 3 struck her amidships within seconds of each other. The explosions tore Minazuki open below the waterline. Fire climbed her superstructure. The depth charges stacked on her stern, meant for Harder, detonated in a chain of secondary blasts that lifted her stern clean out of the water. She broke in half. Both pieces went down in less than 5 minutes. Of 150 men, roughly 45 survived to be pulled from the oil-slick water at dawn. In the conning tower of USS Harder, Samuel Dealey watched through the periscope as the debris field spread across the moonlit sea. He did not speak. He did not celebrate, but the fight was not over. 43 minutes after Minazuki broke in half, Harder's radar picked up the second destroyer of the convoy, closing hard from 14,000 yards away. Dealey turned toward her. At 1,250 yards, he fired all 6 of his bow tubes in a single spread. 6 torpedoes. The Japanese captain saw them coming. He turned his ship with a skill that must have surprised him as much as it surprised Dealey. Every torpedo missed. The second destroyer began her depth charge runs. Harder went down to 400 feet and rigged for silent running, and for the next hour and a half, the crew held their breath while the sea overhead thundered. But the water was strange that night. Layers of different temperatures bent the sound. The Japanese sonar could not hold contact. Just before midnight, the destroyer gave up and returned to her convoy. Harder slipped away into the darkness. The first destroyer was gone. The second had gotten away. The old man had done the math, and one time in 6, the math had not held. It was a lesson he would carry into the next 4 days. The Japanese combined fleet did not yet know it had lost Minazuki. By dawn, the water around Tawi-Tawi was awake. Admiral Toyota received the news in Tokyo at 9 in the morning and ordered 6 more destroyers into the search. Patrol planes lifted off every 20 minutes. Sonar pings echoed through the Sulu Sea like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something no one could yet name. Harder went deep and quiet and slow. Down in the boat, the men worked in near total silence. Fans off, ventilation off. The air grew thick and warm. Sweat ran down bulkheads. A sailor near the after torpedo room later remembered that he could hear his own heartbeat. They stayed submerged all day. At 2:30 in the morning of June 7th, Harder came up to recharge her batteries. The sea was black. The moon had gone behind heavy clouds. It was the kind of night a submarine captain prays for. At 3:12, radar picked up a contact. Single ship, bearing 095, range 8,000 yards, closing at 28 knots. A destroyer, running fast, running blind. Her name was Hayanami. She was a Yugumo-class destroyer, newer than Minazuki, larger, faster, better armed. Her captain had been searching for American submarines since 1 in the morning. His orders were to return to base at 3. He was tired. His radar operator was tired. Nobody expected an American submarine to attack on the surface in the middle of the night. That was the mistake that killed them. Dealey ordered flank speed. Harder's diesel engines pushed her forward at 21 knots, closing the range deliberately, hunting the hunter. He wanted to be inside Hayanami's radar detection envelope before her operator woke up to what was happening. At 3,000 yards, Hayanami saw him. The signal on her radar screen bloomed suddenly, small and fast and wrong. Her captain understood in a heartbeat. He shouted for flank speed and turned to ram. He was too late. At 650 yards, Dealey fired 6 torpedoes in a full bow spread. 650 yards. Less than the length of 6 football fields. At that range, a destroyer could cross the gap in under a minute. If every torpedo had missed, Hayanami would have driven her bow through harder pressure hull like a spear. They did not all miss. 2 struck her starboard side, near the aft magazine. The explosion was so violent that it tore Hayanami's stern off completely. The ship rolled 90 degrees. Her propellers were still turning as she went under stern first, into water more than 1,000 feet deep. Her captain, Commander Kajita, and roughly 200 of his men died in less than 3 minutes. Harder went deep and ran south. Above her, within an hour, the sea was alive with hunters. 8 Japanese destroyers converged on the last known position of the American submarine. For 6 straight hours they searched, dropping depth charges into empty water, pinging into the deep. Harder listened and slipped away and was not touched. But something else had happened during those 6 hours. Something more important than the survival of a single submarine. In the Japanese command, in the hurried radio traffic between hunting groups and headquarters, in the reports drafted by exhausted destroyer captains at the end of a long night, a false picture began to form. The Japanese did not believe one submarine had done this. They believed they were being attacked by a Wolfpack. 4 boats, maybe 5, operating in coordination, ambushing destroyers one after another with a precision that no single submarine could achieve. The reports went up the chain. Tawi-Tawi headquarters passed them to Combined Fleet. Combined Fleet passed them to Tokyo. The number in the reports grew. By the morning of June 8th, senior Japanese officers were discussing a threat that did not exist. A phantom fleet of American submarines, they believed, was closing in around their anchorage. There was only one submarine. Her captain had 2 children waiting at home in Dallas, and he was not finished. On the evening of June 7th, Harder ran west toward the Borneo coastline at 1/3 speed. She crept in so close that her hull began to scrape the bottom, 6,000 yards off the beach. 2 Australians came up through the forward hatch. Major William Jenkins, Sergeant Stanley Dodds. 2 American torpedomen came with them, First Class Vincent D'Alessandro and Second Class William Young, to help assemble the folding canoes on the wet deck under the tropical stars. They pushed off before dawn. 2 canoes, 4 men, a hostile jungle coast held by the Japanese Imperial Army. On the beach, 6 exhausted men of the Australian Z Special Unit were waiting. They had been operating behind Japanese lines for months. They were sick. They were thin. They were out of time. The canoes brought them home in the small hours of June 9th. At 1:30 in the morning, all 10 men climbed back through Harder's hatch and disappeared below. There was no ceremony. There was no rest. Within an hour, Harder was moving north again, back toward the destroyers, back toward Tawi-Tawi. 2 missions in one patrol. The captain, who was supposed to run, had come to rescue men, and then had gone back to hunt. The evening of June 9th brought Tanikaze. Of all the ships Dealey would sink on that patrol, Tanikaze carried the heaviest, Ghost. She was a Kagero-class destroyer. 2 years earlier, in June of 1942, she had been sent back into the burning waters after the Battle of Midway, sent alone, sent through the wreckage and the enemy air cover to find out whether the Japanese carrier Hiryu was still afloat. She had gone, she had come back, she had survived when almost no one expected her to survive. 61 American aircraft had attacked her that day, and she had come home with her flag still flying. Now, 2 years later, in the fading tropical light off Tawi-Tawi, she was patrolling with a sister ship, zigzagging in formation. Hunting a submarine, she believed, was somewhere in the deep water below. The submarine was watching her through a periscope from 1,000 yards away. Dealey fired 4 torpedoes at the overlapping targets. The second and third torpedoes blasted Tanikaze near her boilers. She sank almost immediately, her hull erupting in a terrific explosion. The fourth torpedo struck the second destroyer, which vanished in a blinding flash of white light. The blast was so massive that the crew of Harder heard it clearly through their sealed pressure hull, a deep rolling boom transmitted through the water like the closing of a great door. 2 ships. 1 salvo. The destroyer that had survived midway went to the bottom with her sister ship in less than 3 minutes. Then Japanese aircraft found them. For the next 2 hours, patrol planes and a surviving escort hunted Harder relentlessly. Depth charges came in waves. The lights went out. A hydraulic line burst. Seawater sprayed across a deck plate. Cork insulation rained from the overhead. Men held on and did not speak. At 500 feet, Harder crept away at 2 knots, quieter than a whisper. Eventually, the hunt gave up and turned for home. 4 destroyers, 3 days, and the pattern had become undeniable to every man in the boat. The old man was doing the math, and the math was killing the enemy. By the afternoon of June 10th, Harder had 5 torpedoes left. She had been at sea for 15 days. Her diesel tanks were more than half empty. Her crew had slept in fragments, 4 hours at a time, for a week. And the water around Tawi-Tawi was now filled with Japanese destroyers, hunting them in coordinated groups. Dealey pressed on. At 4:30 in the afternoon, lookouts spotted 2 more destroyers north of the Cebutu Passage. Both were making high speed, sweeping in an aggressive search pattern. Dealey studied them through the periscope for nearly an hour, waiting for the geometry. At 5:15, he fired 3 torpedoes at the lead destroyer. 1 torpedo struck near her bow. The destroyer slowed, listing, burning, but she did not sink. The second destroyer, seeing the strike, turned and charged Harder's position. Dealey fired his last 2 torpedoes at her. Both missed. For the first time in the patrol, Harder had no teeth left. There were no more torpedoes in the tubes. There were no more torpedoes in reserve. And there was a Japanese destroyer bearing down on her at 32 knots. Her captain, now aware that the American submarine was empty and vulnerable, and finally, in his grasp, Dealey ordered emergency deep. Harder's bow dropped hard. She sank at a steep angle, deeper than she had gone all patrol, past 300 feet, past 400, past 500. Above her, the destroyer began her runs. For 90 minutes, the depth charges came. 42 of them, in patterns of 6 and 8, walked across the sea above USS Harder. 3 exploded close enough to crack gauge glass and start small leaks. The submarine rolled 15 degrees to starboard. Light bulbs shattered in the wardroom. The crew held on and waited, and the old man kept the boat quiet, and the depth charges kept falling. At 7 in the evening, the destroyer ran out of depth charges and left. Harder waited another full hour in the deep, listening. Then, in the safety of full dark, she surfaced under a black sky. The diesel engines coughed to life. The batteries began to charge. And Samuel Dealey, standing on the bridge in a warm tropical wind, gave the order to turn south. The patrol was over. 3 days later, in a wardroom at Tawi-Tawi, Admiral Ozawa read the accumulated reports and made his decision. He believed he was surrounded by American submarines. His destroyer force had been bloodied. His screen was thinning. And the operation he was preparing, AGO, could not be launched from an anchorage that had become a trap. He requested permission to move the mobile fleet north, ahead of schedule. Toyota agreed. On the morning of June 13th, the greatest concentration of Japanese naval power since Midway weighed anchor and began moving toward the Marianas. Their reconnaissance was incomplete. Their destroyer screen was still regrouping from a week of hunting a submarine they had never actually found. 6 days later, off the Marianas, they would meet the American Fifth Fleet, and the sky above the Philippine Sea would fill with 376 burning Japanese aircraft. Nobody in the Japanese fleet standing at their stations that terrible afternoon would connect what was happening around them to a submarine captain from Dallas, Texas, and 4 nights in the Cebutu Passage. But the line ran back to him, straight and unbroken. On the 11th of June, Harder crept close enough to Tawi-Tawi to see the Japanese mobile fleet with her own eyes. She counted the ships. She recorded their positions. That night, she transmitted the numbers to Pearl Harbor. And those numbers went straight to the desk of Admiral Raymond Spruance, who was preparing to fight the largest naval battle in human history. 2 days later, Ozawa's fleet weighed anchor at Tawi-Tawi and began moving toward the Marianas. Harder made port at Darwin on the 21st of June for fresh torpedoes. There, Rear Admiral Ralph Christie, commander of Submarines Southwest Pacific, came aboard. He shook Dealey's hand. He read the patrol report. And then he did something no submarine admiral had ever done. He asked to sail on the next leg of the patrol. On the 21st of June, USS Harder put back to sea into the Flores Sea with a rear admiral of the United States Navy standing quietly at the back of her conning tower, watching a 37-year-old commander from Dallas do the thing that had made him a legend. Harder returned to Darwin on the 3rd of July. Admiral Christie was waiting on the pier when the lines went over. In front of the assembled crew, before Harder's diesel engines had even shut down, he pinned a Navy cross to Samuel Dealey's chest with his own hands. The old man had done the math. The math had held, and the Pacific War would never look the same again. A few days later, Harder made the long run down to Fremantle. In the winter of the Southern Hemisphere, it was a quiet port. Eucalyptus trees, long shadows, the smell of salt and diesel and coffee from the mess halls. For a month, USS Harder rested there. Her hull was patched where the depth charges had cracked her welds. Her torpedo tubes were reloaded. Her men slept in real beds, ate real food, wrote letters home that they could not fully explain. Samuel Dealey spent part of that time briefing other submarine captains on what he had done. He was not a natural teacher. He spoke in short sentences. He drew diagrams on chalkboards. He explained the geometry of the down the throat, shot the way a man might explain how to change a tire, patient and plain. 12 American submarine captains would go on to use his tactics before the war ended. Tang, Barb, Flasher, Trigger. Between June and December of 1944, American submarines would sink 14 Japanese destroyers using variations of what Dealey had proved possible in 4 nights in the Sibutu Passage. He did not know any of that yet. He knew only that another patrol was coming. On the 5th of August, 1944, USS Harder cast off her lines at Fremantle for the last time. She was the flagship of a small Wolfpack now, 3 submarines under one commander. Harder, USS Haddo, USS Hake. Their orders were to hunt the western coast of Luzon in the Philippines, in the waters where Japanese convoys were with the last of the empire's oil. Dealey was in charge. His executive officer aboard Harder was a lieutenant commander named Samuel L. Logan, a quiet man, well-liked, 30 years old. He had a family, too. The patrol began well. On the 21st of August, the 3 submarines fell on a convoy off Palawan and sank 4 cargo ships in a single coordinated attack. On the 22nd, Harder and Haddo caught 3 coastal defense vessels off the coast of Luzon and sent them to the bottom. Harder was credited with 2 Japanese frigates that day, Matsuwa and Hiburi. By the evening of the 23rd, Haddo had fired her last torpedo. She turned south, waving her flag at Harder and Heike as she departed. That left 2 submarines off the western coast of Luzon. 2 American submarines. 1 Japanese coast, awake and angry. Dassault Bay was a wide, shallow indentation on the western shore of Luzon, near the town of Bolinao. Fishing villages lined its edges. The mountains rose behind it, green and steep. It was a beautiful place, and it was a dangerous place, and Harder and Hake settled into patrol positions off its mouth in the early hours of the 24th of August. At 4:53 in the morning, USS Heike dove to periscope depth. Through her lens, her captain, Frank Haler, could see Harder on the surface, 4,500 yards to the south. Both submarines were preparing to attack a damaged Japanese destroyer that Hado had crippled the day before. Standard work, nothing they had not done 100 times. Then Heike's sonar operator heard it. Echo ranging. Close. Getting closer. 2 Japanese escort ships were closing on Harder's position. Not destroyers, not battleships, not the great warships Dealey had made his name against. Something smaller. The lead ship was a Kaibokan, a coastal defense vessel. Her designation was CD-22. She was less than 1,000 tons, half the size of the destroyers Harder had killed. Behind her came the second ship. Her name in Japanese service was Patrol Boat 102. But she had been born under another flag and another name. 2.5 years earlier, in the Java Sea in February of 1942, an American destroyer named USS Stewart had been damaged in battle and left in a floating dry dock at Surabaya. When the Japanese overran the port, the Americans tried to scuttle her, but the Japanese pulled her out of the water, patched her wounds, painted over her name, and put her back to sea under a rising sun. Now, off the coast of Luzon, on the morning of August 24th, 1944, a captured American warship and a Japanese coastal defense vessel were closing on the greatest submarine hunter in the United States Navy. They were the ships nobody wrote songs about. They were the ships that killed submarines. At 5:20 in the morning, Hake's radio operator tried to reach Harder. There was no answer. Either Harder's radio was off, or her captain was already at his periscope, or the moment had already begun. At 5:30, Heike watched through her periscope as USS Harder crash dived. She went down fast, too fast. Her stern kicked up as her bow drove for the deep, and her diesel engines were still turning as she submerged. Leaving a great trail of bubbles on the surface, a signature that any competent sonar operator could read like a signpost. CD-22's sonar operator was competent. He had a perfect contact, range 1,200 yards, depth 200 feet, and still going. At 5:47, CD-22 made her first depth charge run. Her captain ordered a full pattern set to detonate at 250 feet. The charges walked directly across Harder's position. 3 of them detonated within 50 feet of her pressure hull. The after torpedo room cracked open. Seawater came in under enormous pressure, filling the compartment in seconds. Her stern flooded. Her bow rose sharply. Deep in the boat, in the sealed and darkened spaces where 79 American sailors were still alive, they would have understood immediately what had happened. Dealey ordered all ballast blown. Emergency surface. The compressed air fought against the flooding. The flooding won. At 5:52, CD-22 made a second run. This pattern hit even closer. The pressure hull ruptured in several places at once. The control room flooded. Every light in the submarine went dark. At 600 feet, well below her maximum operating depth, USS Harder began to implode. The sea reclaimed her in less than 3 minutes. Above, on the surface, CD-22 circled the area for 2 hours. Oil rose to the surface. Wood chips, cork insulation from the overhead of a compartment that no longer existed. The Japanese sailors watched the debris and understood correctly that they had killed something significant. They did not know they had killed the man who had rewritten the rules of submarine warfare. They did not know they had killed the man who had killed Ikazuchi, Minazuki, Hayanami, and Tanikaze. They did not know that a small Japanese kaibokan and the ghost of an American destroyer had, together, taken the greatest submarine hunter in the United States Navy. Aboard USS Harder, watching from a periscope 4,000 yards away, Frank Haler drafted the contact report that would eventually reach Pearl Harbor. He noted the position. He noted the time. He noted the silence that followed the last explosions, a silence that would not be broken by Harder's screws or by any signal from her radio. 79 men were gone. Samuel Dealey was 37 years old. His wife, Edwina, was in Dallas. She did not yet know. The news reached Pearl Harbor on the 25th of August. Vice Admiral Charles Lockwood read the report and then sat for a long time without speaking. He had signed the orders that put Harder off Dassel Bay. He had known the risks. He had approved the tactics. He had endorsed the Navy Cross that Rear Admiral Ralph Christie had pinned to Samuel Dealey's chest on a pier in Darwin 2 months earlier. He suspended American submarine operations in the Dassel Bay area and ordered every boat in the region to withdraw. The Navy Department announced the loss in early September. Harder was presumed lost with all hands. No details. Submarine operations were classified. The American public would not learn the full story for years. But some things could not be classified. In late 1945, 3 months after the war ended, President Harry Truman stood on the lawn of the White House and placed the Medal of Honor into the hands of Edwina Dealey. Her 3 children stood beside her. They were small. They wore their best clothes. They did not fully understand what was happening. The citation was read aloud. It described a captain who had sunk 5 Japanese destroyers in 5 short-range torpedo attacks during a single war patrol. It used words like conspicuous gallantry and indomitable command, and above and beyond the call of duty. It did not describe the man who had done the math. It did not describe the man who twice had tried to leave the Navy so he could stay home with his family. It did not describe the man who had died at 600 feet in the dark without a torpedo left to fire, killed by a small ship of the kind he had taught his brother captains to avoid. That man was gone, but the citation was true. After the war, the accountants of the Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee sat down to reconcile the records. Every sinking claimed by American submarines was measured against Japanese records recovered from the ruins of Tokyo. Their conclusion on the fifth patrol of USS Harder was careful. 3 destroyers were confirmed sunk. Minazuki, Hayanami, Tanikaze. 2 more, on the 10th of June, were assessed as heavily damaged rather than sunk. The Medal of Honor citation, written in the summer of 1944, credited Dealey with 5 destroyers. The post-war record credited him with 3 sinkings and 2 crippling attacks. Both are true in the way that history is often true in more than one way at once. In the summer of 1944, the United States Navy honored Samuel Dealey for what its best analysts believed at the time. Post-war records refined the count, but they did not change what he did or what it cost the enemy. The number that mattered most was never in the records at all. The number that mattered most was the fact that Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, on the 13th of June 1944, moved his mobile fleet out of Tawi-Tawi ahead of schedule, believing his anchorage was surrounded by American submarines that were not there. 6 days later, in the sky above the Philippine Sea, 376 Japanese aircraft went down in flames. 3 Japanese aircraft carriers went to the bottom. The naval air arm of the Empire of Japan was, for all practical purposes, destroyed in an afternoon. Samuel Dealey did not win that battle. Radar won it. American pilots won it. Ultra-intelligence won it. Superior aircraft won it. But he shaped it. He made it happen when it happened, in the way that it happened, and no one who studies the record honestly disputes that if Harder had not been in the Cebutu Passage during those 4 days in June, the battle above the Philippine Sea would have looked different. Better ships, better planes, better intelligence, all of it mattered. And a single quiet man from Dallas mattered too. On the 22nd of May, 2024, 80 years after her last dive, a research team led by Tim Taylor and the Lost 52 Project found USS Harder on the floor of the South China Sea. She sits upright in the mud, 12 miles west of Daeseol Bay, at a depth of more than 3,000 feet. Her pressure hull is largely intact. The damage is concentrated near her conning tower, in exactly the place the Japanese depth charges would have struck. She is a war grave. No one will disturb her, but she has been found, and 79 families, some of whom waited 3 generations, know at last where their fathers and grandfathers and great-uncles are resting. At Arlington National Cemetery, in Section 59, Grave 874, there is a headstone for Samuel David Dealey. It lists his rank, his dates, and one short line beneath his name: Medal of Honor, Destroyer, Killer. He is not buried under that stone. He is under 3,000 feet of water in a steel hull off the coast of the Philippines, with the 78 men he took there. The quiet man from Dallas had done the math one last time. The math held. and 4 nights in June in a passage between two islands most Americans will never see changed the course of the largest war in human history. If you have listened this far, you already understand why we remember them. Say their names when you can.